Warning: the following show contains intelligent thoughts, well-formulated ideas, and occasional pointless banter. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today on Hashing Out the Details. Today is Friday, February 25th, 2022. Everybody knows that the top story going on out there right now is the Ukraine invasion by Russia. We're going to talk a little about that tonight. Matter of fact, we're going to have a little bit of a history lesson, because if it's anything I've noticed is that nobody seems to even know where this came from, or where it started, or why. By the time we're done, you're going to know exactly why. Also, we're going to cover something a little more fun. We're going to talk about a show I have never watched until this year, The Amazing Race. Yes, I know I am way late to the party. It is, season 30-something now? We'll talk a little bit about that, and we will see whatever else we might have enough time for tonight. So let's get started. Let's talk about this whole invasion of Ukraine. Now, a lot of people, seems like they don't even know what this is all about. And we're going to talk about that here, because this situation goes back. It is not a modern situation. This is a problem that's gone on for hundreds of years, and most people don't even know about it. So let's talk a little bit about what started all this. This actual dispute really runs back to the mid-1700s, and what happened at that time. You have to understand the political and historical climate that these areas have been under in the past. What we now call the Ukraine was really just an area that was occupied by a host of many different tribal and ethnic groups, each one kind of laying claim to a different area or territory of what we now call the Ukraine. Now, in the late 1700s, the area that we now call the Crimean Peninsula, or Crimea, was fundamentally dominated by those of a Russian ethnic connection. A lot of individuals lived there, or it was very heavily populated by a Russian-based population in that vicinity. Now, what happened was all the different tribes and ethnic groups were kind of fighting it out with each other for supremacy. And the Crimea just happens to be the best farmland located in that area. And what happened was the Russian population of that time period appealed to the Russian nation, the Russian kingdom and empire, for some level of protection based on their shared ethnic connection, their ethnic background. And so the Tsarina of the time did in fact annex what we now call Crimea into under the protection of the Russian Empire. Now, that being the case, now they were under an umbrella of protection. Thing was, not all the other tribes recognized that annexation into Russia. Now, for the next several hundred years, off and on, that country was under a great deal of turmoil, being turned over from one empire to another. But that area of Crimea always stayed really as part of Russia. Now, let's fast forward here through a couple hundred years. We're going to go through World War I, World War II, and that takes us into the 1950s, where this is really going to be the seeds that bring us to the modern day problem. See, by that point, the Soviet Union was in full swing. It was, as for those of you who might be too young to remember the Soviet Union, it was the nation of Russia with a series of bordering satellite countries that, while they all had their own individual quote-unquote sovereign governments, really they were just under the auspices of Russia and the communist oversight of Mother Russia. Now, when the Soviet Union fell in early 1990s, I think it was 1990 or 1991, now that I'm thinking about it, those countries were all left to their own devices and kind of went off to do their own thing. Now, in the mid 1950s, I've really never seen any kind of exact explanation as to why this occurred. A lot of people simply feel it was a matter of just politicizing at the time and trying to maneuver different groups around and handle different groups of those satellite countries. The nation of Ukraine, the government of Russia, essentially gave Crimea back to the country of Ukraine, or to what was now the country of Ukraine, because there was no Ukraine when they first took over that territory. They gave it to the nation of Ukraine to be under its auspices. Now, what eventually is going to happen here is you have still a highly Russian ethnic population to that area. They're not generally Ukrainian in genealogy, shall we say. They're not Ukrainian peoples living in Crimea. Here we are, and when Ukraine became its own independent country, of course, Crimea came with it. Now, I want you all to understand the political climate of the time of when the Soviet Union fell. When the Soviet Union collapsed, leaving Russia and all its previous satellite countries really just trying to scramble to find a new identity, Russia, which was then and still remains a major power in the world of global politics, and with that, a thermonuclear power at that, they put up a notice to the West, and it went something like this. We will rebuild our country. We will not stand in the way of the West and democracy, but you keep NATO out of our sphere, our borders. We don't want NATO coming here. Now, what happened? Within the next decade, I believe, of the 14 or 15 satellite nations of the Soviet Union, I believe well over half joined NATO. So NATO expanded into the Russian, what you might call for them, their national security area, meaning their bordering countries that are within easy striking range of them. Many of them joined NATO, which obviously is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military conglomerate treaty, which essentially means that anybody who's in NATO, if they are attacked by any other country, all the other members of NATO must respond as if they were attacked. So, if a member of NATO is, bombed by such and such country, well then all the other members of NATO have to act as though they were the ones who were bombed and respond with military force to the aggressing country. When NATO was formed in I believe it was the 50s again, it was designed as a way to ensure security against what we used to call the Iron Curtain countries, all the communist nations of Eastern Europe, which had their own, military club that was called the Warsaw Pact, a mutual, aggression defense treaty amongst all those countries. So you're dealing with two clubs at that point. One was for communist countries, one was for West, democracies, and when the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain fell in the very early 90s, the need for NATO on that playing field of Eastern Europe, NATO needed to redefine its purpose. For whatever reason, they found that their purpose was to spread even further. I'm not going to say, I don't have an opinion on that, to be honest. I feel that Russia probably did feel like they were getting slapped around and in many ways poked at by this large military force, military treaty, which had at one time's sole purpose been to keep Russia in check, to know that their place was they had opposition. I don't know if I was Russia, if I would be comfortable with that same club parking itself at my border. I'm not siding with anybody. I'm sure NATO had its reasons too. But here we are. You have the situation as I had explained earlier, you landed with that NATO expansion into the early 2000s, and you have the Crimea problem area in Ukraine. Now, this all came to a head some time ago, and the early part of the 2010s, I think it was 2014, 2016, there was multiple skirmishes about this until finally a full-on, back and forth militarily broke out. It was actually more of a civil war. The Ukrainian government was overthrown. There was actually very much a pro-Moscow, pro-Russia government standing in Ukraine up until that point. It was overthrown and replaced with a very pro-West, pro-US, pro-Western Europe government. So when that happened, there was a skirmish that broke out in 2016, I believe it was. I could be wrong on that. I believe it was 2016. The Ukrainian military suffered a series of just devastating losses to the Russian-backed military who opposed them, and a treaty was brokered called the Minsk Treaty. Okay, the Minsk Treaty essentially stated that the Ukraine would withdraw from any militarized action against the Crimean area, and Russia would take full responsibility for Crimea, such that it would be Russian territory, following any withdrawal of military, etc., from that area by the Ukrainians. Well, it is 2022, and to be perfectly honest, they didn't really follow their end of the deal. From the moment they signed it, honestly, the Ukrainian government has argued that it was a bad deal, that they didn't want to withdraw from Crimea, that it was theirs, it was their territory. Russia said no. The people of Crimea, actually, and this is true, they had an election, a special vote, whereby they said, we have never, nor do we want to be part of the Ukraine. We are Russian peoples, and we want to be part of Russia. Russia welcomed them with open arms and said, all right, well, you can be part of Russia. Well, of course, this means that you've got two countries that are arguing over this territory. That being the case, it's really become, this is a fight between two cousins, everyone. This is a fight between two cousins who both have their point of view, and neither one's backing off it. The tragedy of it all is that the Russian sense of pride is on the line here. Vladimir Putin, their prime minister, has never been, and will never be a nice man. He is ex-KGB. He has a very ingrained from birth sense of Russian nationalism. A lot of those of that generation, when the Soviet Union fell, suffered a terribly humiliating series of years there, when Russia had to really reinvent itself and go through the pains of an entirely new economy system, an entirely new government, and an entirely new outlook on the rest of the world. And they really struggled for a while there to come out of that. Now, after the time of Boris Yeltsin in the Kremlin, there really has not been a very United States Western-friendly prime minister in the Russian office. They've gotten along well enough, and that's really been about the limit of it. They are relatively isolationist compared to the way we might, see things here in the United States or in Western Europe, who obviously we tend to lean more toward a globalized, multilateral strategy for how to interact with the rest of the world. The Russians, as a culture, don't operate that way. They are proud to function unilaterally. Mother Russia comes before anything else in the Russian cultural mindset. And if we look at it from that perspective, we can probably see a little better just what it is that's happening out there. All things considered, the Russian government is looking out for Russia and Russia first. Matter of fact, probably more like Russia first, Russia second, Russian third, and probably about the Russian 1 through 25. They are not overly concerned with how the rest of the world thinks of them. They are worried about being powerful and showing their power and dominating that which they consider to be their sphere of influence and security. The Baltic areas, that whole area underneath and surrounding, Mongolia up through into the Siberian areas. Those areas of the globe are what Russia considers to be its traditional influential territory, and they do not take kindly to outsiders having a say in that. Which is why Vladimir Putin has not been more receptive to a diplomatic response, as far as like other countries sending their ambassadors and having these diplomatic conversations. Vladimir Putin likes to show force. He likes to rattle his saber, and in this case, he's using his saber, folks. The tragedy really going on here is at the street level. There are people who've seen war a lot in this area. A lot of these, they were finally getting to a point where the country had settled enough to really start to grow. And because they've never been able to settle this issue with Russia, there's innocent people going to die. And it's tragic, and it's sad, and it's painful that these two cousins can't find a way to stop with this nationalistic fight. It's painful to have to watch from the outside. Honestly, I think what we're seeing developing here is a clash of cultures. We are not accustomed to warmongering types of leadership. We're used to our diplomats saying we want peace. We want peace at all costs. We want a diplomatic solution to this. We want to sit down and have a dialogue. We're not used to our leaders saying, well, we could just solve this with tanks. Launch missiles and bombers and tanks, and why should I talk about it when I can just go and take the right answer for me? We're not used to that over here, and a lot of the world isn't used to that anymore, because that's just not how most parts of the world function on a relationship to other countries' level. But then again, if you want to really get honest, we didn't like the situation in Iraq, some time ago, and what did we do? We sent over our military and we changed the regime, which, from a certain perspective, is exactly what Russia thinks it's doing. Well, at least that's the excuse they're giving. I'm not even gonna try to tell you what is the truth behind their motivations. I mean, it could just be economic right down to it, and that, like I said before, Crimea has some of the most wonderful farmland available in all of Europe. Russia is the number one wheat producing country on the face of the planet. That Crimean area to be no longer under dispute would certainly allow for an expansion of Russian-backed farming and things of that nature in that area. That would likely be a continued economic boon for them. I'm not going to say economics does not play into any of this. It certainly does. There are many things that play into it. So you really have to look at this whole thing as a series of unfortunate events that have led us. There's no war happens because of nothing. Matter of fact, there's nothing in the entire world that doesn't have two sides to it, and a series of events that led up to it where somebody could have made a different decision that would change the course. And in this case, you had two sides that both believe they're absolutely right. And when two sides, neither one is willing to accept anything but absolute victory, well, then somebody's going to lose, unfortunately. And that's where we are, folks. We are at a point where somebody's going to have to lose. And, I mean, realistically, the Ukrainian people are the losers here. The country of Ukraine can't hold up for very long. Their entire military is less than, I think 300,000 soldiers available at any one time. Russia has nearly 1 million available soldiers at any given time, not including its reserve forces, which it can call up at any time in the event of the need. Russia has a dramatically more powerful military. It's really not a situation that the Ukrainians have any realistic chance of standing up. As the Russians come through, have no doubt in your mind, the Ukrainians are ready for a fight. They're going to be more than able to give the Russians a bloody nose coming in, but they're not going to be able to stop them. It's a very, very short time before the Russian military will have captured Kiev, their capital city. I believe the most of the Ukrainian government has already left the capital and is in, at the furthest possible point from where the Russian military is as they roll across the countryside of Ukraine on a three-way. First one there wins. They've come in from three different directions heading toward Kiev, so it's not going to be very long. It very, very well be by the middle of the weekend that the capital of Ukraine has fallen to the Russian forces. I hope, I really do, that the least amount of innocent people are harmed during all this. It's always the innocent people that suffer the worst, because even if this whole thing stops on a military basis quickly, the disruption to so many things is going to be just horrific. The world has suffered this pandemic this last several years. Almost all the countries of the world have been weakened in some way, shape, or form. Ukraine is no different. But in fact, Russia is no different. All of that considered, and all that, when you think about all those things, you have a situation where are the Ukrainian people, once the Russians take control of their government, going to be able to have access to things that the government was oversighting, things like COVID testing, COVID, numbers, and the care of those people is. Those types of things are all government related, and with the government about to collapse under itself because of invasion, pandemic control in the Ukraine is going to pretty much go out the window. I know that the U.S. has basically put out an order to any and all American nationals in the Ukraine to get out ASAP. Don't look back. Do not wait. Do not, grab what you need and exit the country as fast as you can. I know for a fact that there are actually at least 5,000 American, those doing evangelical and charity work there through different denominations of the Christian churches. I know there are at least 5,000 who have already stated they're not leaving because of the mission work. They feel like their work is more important than their safety, that they're staying there for the good of the people they're trying to help there. And I give them the greatest amount of respect possible. I can't imagine having my family in harm's way and agreeing not to exit because they know they're there to help those people. I mean, I give them all the props in the world, because that has to be a terrifying situation to know that it's very likely that, people you are helping or even yourself could be in a life or death situation just any moment. And under a new under a new government, you don't know how they're going to react to their presence there. You don't know anything. And unfortunately, neither do the rest of us. So we're all going to watch with great intentness as to what's happening out there. And if we're smart, we're going to hope that cooler heads eventually will prevail once the fighting has no reason to continue. I hope that the Ukrainians are smart enough to realize they can't win this. And I'm hoping even more against hope that our governments are smart enough to know there's no strategic or national security interest, especially for us in the United States, to send anyone into that fight. It is not our fight. It is two cousins that have been fighting for a long time. It is a family feud, and it is not a place for our sons, our daughters, our brothers, our sisters, our fathers, and our friends to get involved in. If the governments want to use these economic sanctions to try and, quote unquote, punish Russia for its aggression, that's not going to really do anything to them, I'll be honest. It's just not. It's not going to have any major impact on how the Russians see things. As a matter of fact, it might even fuel them even worse, because they're going to think, or they're going to react to that with, we acted as Russians to deal with a Russian problem, and all of you are sticking your noses where it doesn't belong. I can very easily see that being how Vladimir Putin and the Russian government figures to react to all that. I have heard it's actually an interesting thing. I was reading yesterday that all in all, the Russian people are fairly indifferent to all this. It's almost like they kind of hear about it all and they're like, that's Putin doing his thing, whatever. They're almost apathetic to the things that are happening here. There was a very large poll taken, large for what we're talking about here. They did a poll of a number of different areas of the Russian citizenry, and most of them were kind of like reacting to the whole thing as, we don't really care what happens. And I found that to be fascinating, that the citizenry is almost, they're not supportive and they're not against it. They just don't care. And I really have to wonder, that's such a foreign thing to us here in the U.S. to hear such an apathy like that, and that the people wouldn't react to their government, because they don't do that there. There have been many crackdowns on citizen protests and things of that variety. They don't have the same kind of government, hands off that we're accustomed to here in our country and in Western Europe, where protests and citizen outcries and citizen, reactions to the government are so part of the fabric of our history and our way of understanding government citizenry relationship, that they absolutely positively can't fathom how in Russia the citizens are conditioned to almost look the other way, or to not express how they might feel openly, for fear that there's probably going to be some kind of a reprisal by the government over that kind of a, the citizenry reacting openly in opposition to the government. So all those things play into what's happening. And I'm telling you, folks, let's all hope for the best here, and that this situation will cool off after a very, I'm kind of viewing this invasion as this is the whole thing has blown its top. It's, it's burning, it's hot. Let's hope that this fizzles out very quickly. Let's hope it's a sparkler and not a mortar shell. That this is something that fires up quickly and then cools off, and cooler heads prevail, and eventually things are able to settle into some form of a calm after all this is over with, that they'll be able to bring these countries together and back into the world and global stage in a way that we can all be able to get back to reacting to each other and interacting with each other in a civil manner. Let's really hope for that. Okay, we're going to talk about something a little bit more fun now. After all that Ukrainian news, I want to talk about something a little more life to it, a little more fun. So here we go. Anybody who has ever met me knows that I detest reality TV. I have, from moment one, I have loathed things like Survivor, Super Nanny, all those, Big Brother. And this goes back to even way back, granddaddy of them all, The Real World. I could never understand the fascination or the appeal for anyone to watch reality TV. I want you to think about this for a moment out there. The words reality TV. Why do, with the exception of watching news coverage, why do any of us watch television? To escape reality, correct? Am I right? Why in the world would I voluntarily choose to sit and watch quote-unquote reality on television? I am a believer that TV is escapist fare. It is meant to be something you view to take yourself away from your reality, from reality in general. Now, that being said, this year I discovered something that I had never experienced before, and I accept this. I am way late to this game, but I began watching The Amazing Race. And now I know Amazing Race is more of a game show than quote unquote reality TV. It's not a show, like an episodic show of that form. But I'm going to say that the only reason I watched it this year was for the Holdernesses. Now, for any of you out there who don't know who they are, obviously they've been on the show now this season. I was already a huge fan of theirs. They are a couple who basically at this point have their own multimedia force to be reckoned with, their own multimedia production company. They began by making small, humorous videos just starring them and their family, and it has grown to be a multi-phased multimedia company that they run, and their stuff is genius. It's down to earth, and it's hilarious, and it's poignant, and I really, really enjoy them a lot. My wife and I say that the Holdernesses got us through COVID. And what I mean by that is this. My wife and I actually both work for the same company. We work in a program designed to work with the intellectually challenged. Now, when COVID hit in its full throes in early 2020, that forced our program to shut down for some time. And, matter of fact, 6 months almost out of 2020, we were laid off. So we were home a lot. And every morning, when we'd get up, me and my wife, our kids would still be sleeping, we would get up and we'd sit at the kitchen table and have our coffee and watch whatever new Holderness video was coming out. And at that time, I think they realized they had a captive audience. They were pumping out new videos probably every other day for quite some time, and they got us through COVID. It gave us a way and a reason to laugh and to look forward to something when all that, just being stuck in your house and the lockdowns and all that stuff was in its height. Their videos really gave us something to look forward to and just to laugh at a time when everybody just had permanent scowls on their face, or at least semi-permanent, and just people were frustrated and people were frightened, and nobody really knew just what was going to happen. And they gave us something, the gift of humor and the gift of laughter, and I really appreciated them for those efforts. And when I found out they were going to be on this season of Amazing Race, I put aside my personal biases against anything that could be construed as even being close to reality TV, and I started watching it. That being said, I've watched this season, and number one, I'm really impressed with their teamwork. I'm going to say that they might be a life goal for many married couples. They really are. And if they ever listen to this, I hope they both hear me when I say thumbs up. There are many of us who really appreciate you and everything you guys do and are, and big fan. Shout out to the Holdernesses. But I watched this last week's episode, and it was the reason I don't get into this stuff, and here's why. I got a kick out of it. The whole episode this past Wednesday was based on they were dumped off, them and their competing couples, in little backwood town Greece. This is not a tourist area of Greece. It was really out in the middle of nowhere, like sheep herding country, shall we say. Like they were in the middle of nothing. So what all these couples ran into was that, unlike in the touristy areas, that kind of thing, they were given their instructions and given directions to get to where they need to go find their next clue or whatever have you. But all of these street signs were in Greek. All of the peoples they encountered, nobody spoke English. So most of the episode was a real, they were all struggling greatly to find where they were trying to get to. And I mean, they just didn't know where they were going, what to do, or how to get there. And I really actually started feeling bad for them. The frustration level that was building up watching all these different couples just doing their best to get from point A to point B and having no idea, because the producers of the show didn't even tell them where they were when they dropped them off. They didn't even know the name of the city or anything to even give this as like a starting point of reference. They didn't even know where they were. So I give them all the credit in the world for hanging in, all of them on that show. Most of them have been pretty cool people to watch. But in the end, it was a real dogfight. They finally found these little golden coins or whatever they were supposed to be looking for. Like, after watching people turning rocks over for what seemed like a half a year, but it was really probably only a couple minutes edited down. They were just turning all these rocks over looking for a little golden coin under it. And I remember watching it going, boy, this is kind of getting repetitive now, just watching them flip coins, or, rocks over and over and over and over and over. Well, they finally find their coins, and finally at the very end, they get to the last couple to find their coin or whatever it was, their token they were looking for. And, the guy who's running the game comes in and goes, I got good news for you, because and they're all exhausted, and they're tired, and all these competitors have just had it. And throughout the episode, you kind of think that the last team to find their thing is going to be out of this, because that's generally how it works. They get eliminated, whoever's in the tail end of the whatever that week's challenge is. And you went through all this episode, and at the end he announces it's a non-elimination leg of the race, so nobody's out. So I gotta admit, it was the first time I watched an episode this season where I watched it, and at the end I was kind of like, okay, yeah, it made for some good TV. It made for some, artificially created drama and that kind of thing, but in the end, I could have skipped the episode and wouldn't have missed anything, because nothing happened in the end. It was a non-elimination part of the game, per se, or whatever. And so we watched all that struggle, all that stuff, and really it didn't mean anything except for whoever got first place won. I think it was like a vacation or something like that. So if that's your thing, I give you, great, watch it all to your heart's content, but I guess when I watch a show that I know is like supposed to be a, do or die format to the game, and in the end it's like turns out, oh, never mind, nothing you just watched and invested yourself in really mattered. So see you next week. That's what really bothered me in that whole episode. Well, that brings us to our last segment for tonight. For just a minute or two, we're going to talk here about baseball, the great American pastime, which I would honestly say is becoming a cult sport, painfully for me to admit. Baseball is not the sport it used to be. It is not America's pastime anymore. That's a nickname which, while it is held, it is no longer really applicable. Football is America's sport. Baseball in the early to mid 90s had a strike that some of you will remember, and some of you might be too young to remember that. Baseball going into the strike was a solid number 1A as far as fanship in this country of it as a sport. It came out of that strike wounded. The public turned against the sport because it was nothing more than two sets of rich people arguing about who got to be more rich faster. And the fans who shell out so much money just to go to a game and then pay $16 for a cup of beer, $10 for a hot dog, they didn't want to hear arguments anymore about money. And because if you see the guy in the field, he's making more money than you'll probably ever dream of. Even if you're 1,000 times smarter and more productive than he could ever be in his life, you're sniffing his paychecks. It's that simple. And the people realized it during that strike, which dragged on for months and months. It cost half a season plus the World Series, and the fans were angry. After it was finally resolved and the people came back, the next year and a half of baseball suffered. Fans were just, they held a grudge, they did, against it. And if it wasn't for the now disgraced names of Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, At that time, they were Paul Bunyan and Samson as they raced each other through most of the season, going back and forth, chasing the home run record. Now, in the end, Mark McGwire broke that record. But it was that chase that fueled the fans' return to the game of baseball. But there was one other man who was involved there. A man named Cal Ripken. Cal Ripken played in, I can't even remember the number now. In the end, I think it was close to 3,000 straight games without missing one. The Iron Man himself. He went on and on and on without injury, without suffering. You know, he never lost a game to injury or suspension or any of that kind of foolish stuff. He was just a fan's player in every way, shape, and form. He went to work every day. It was like a guy brought his lunch pail to work, and the fans loved him. He was a great ambassador for the sport, just a good guy all around. And as he slowly came closer and closer to Lou Gehrig's, what they used to call the Iron Man record, the consecutive games played, the fans really started to come back. And his ambassadorship of the game was the branch of goodwill that allowed the fans to let go of their grudge, their anger over that strike. And for those of you who don't remember it or were too young to see it, I encourage you to go on YouTube and look up the game where Cal Ripken broke Lou Gehrig's Iron Man record. Cal Ripken, when he finally crossed the point where enough of the game had been played, I want to say it was the 5th or 6th inning, where he crossed enough of the game having been played for it to count, and that he finally had broken that record. They stopped the game, and he ran around that stadium, and he spent, it was like a 20-minute event where he slowly worked his way around the entire field, just high-fiving and shaking hands with the fans and the people that were there. And obviously, the love that was being poured out on that field to this day gives me the chills, because I still remember it. I was just a teenager when that happened, and I remember watching that game and just being moved by what I was watching. It was that heartfelt. The interplay between Cal Ripken and those fans on that night, it carried through the television sets to us at home. That saved the sport of baseball. Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, and Cal Ripken saved baseball from being lost to history at that point. We are back to a similar situation where the collective bargaining agreement has ended, and baseball has again locked its players out for refusing to sign a new deal. And what we are seeing now is both sides are arguing about it's normal union ownership type arguments. It's who's in charge. If somebody gets in trouble, who makes the final decision if they're to be punished or not. There's arguments about how long a guy has to be under contract where he can renegotiate. All those kinds of normal economic things. Here's the hang-up, folks. Baseball is not the megalith it was in, I believe it was 1993 or 1994 when the last strike happened. There's not enough goodwill left for the fans to come back with open arms if this drags on for too long. I fear baseball is right now putting a knife to its own throat in a way. The fans have too many other options, too many other places to go for other things to watch and to entertain them. And if baseball does not find a way to iron out these little things and get this game on the field, the fans are not going to come back this time. I really believe that. There's no Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa chasing the home run record. There's no Cal Ripken with that kind of goodwill credit that the fans are going to turn back and reach out with open arms and grab a hold of and latch on to that way again. They're just not. And without those kinds of things at baseball's fingertips to pull back the fanship, if this strike drags into the season, resulting in missed games and lost opportunity I mean, they're only hurting themselves. Lost games is lost revenue for the players, it's lost revenue for the owners, and it's lost chance of connection for the fans. I mean, you can't have this happen all the time. No other sport, with the exception of hockey, has had a major strike in the last, I believe, 40 or 50 years. And baseball keeps coming back to this. I want to say this is the second or third time that they've played this brinksmanship game right to the edge, and since that strike in the early 90s, and the fans at this point don't need baseball anymore. Baseball needs the fans, but the fans don't need baseball, not like they used to. That being said, I really hope they can find a way to get this all put together. It seems that both sides have drawn a line in the sand, which unfortunately are, they're a few steps apart from each other, and neither one is going to step over to meet the other one at this particular point. That's unfortunately not very good for baseball. It's not good for players. It's not good for the owners. It's not good for us fans. I want to see, the boys of summer out there. I look forward to spring training every year, as do many other fans. I look forward to that special day on the calendar that says pitchers and catchers report. And the reason for that, I mean, some of it for me is nostalgia. I mean, I was very close to my grandpa, and me and my grandpa watched baseball all summer long. It was, and a lot of other guys out there, and some women too, but a lot of guys, their memories of baseball is so connected to watching with their dad, watching with their uncle, watching with their grandpa, watching with their brothers. Just, it was a communal experience. Going to a game, with the family. It's an experience. And it's a connection to the heart. And baseball has that in a way that a lot of other sports don't. Baseball traditionally holds tight, very tight, more so than any other sport, to its past and to its traditions and to its legacies. I really am convinced that this is baseball's last chance. If they don't find a way to seal this deal and get this sport out on the grass so we can hear, the smack of a mitt and the crack of a bat when we're supposed to see it and hear it and experience it again, I don't know that baseball recovers from this. Not to be the sport that it's been, and not to be the sport that it can be. I really hope that they're able to work all this out. And, I guess we're going to see what's going to happen here very shortly, because there is a deadline, I believe, somewhere in the next few days to not miss games and get a deal done. That line in the sand seems to have been drawn up by the owners themselves, so I guess, as us fans we're on the sidelines. We can't do anything about any of this, but the ones who can, I sure hope do. So, in the end, folks, I thank you for joining us on Hashing Out the Details today. Join in next time. If you want to drop me a comment, please feel free. If there's something you want to hear me talk about, shoot me a message, shoot me a comment. I'll be more than happy to take a look at it and maybe bring it up on our next episode. Thank you again, and have a great night. Bye-bye.